The rain had just started to fall when the first call came. A vague report of 2 dogs lying near the edge of an abandoned construction site, one barely moving, the other crying out in short, broken whimpers that didn't sound like barking, but pleading. When rescuers arrived, they didn't see 2 dogs at first, just a blur of fur, half buried in dust, shivering beneath a slab of concrete. But as they stepped closer, the truth unfolded in a way no one was prepared for. A German shepherd lay crumpled and motionless, her body twisted unnaturally, pinned beneath debris that must have fallen days earlier. Her eyes were dull, distant, but beside her, pressed so close it looked like one body instead of 2, was her puppy, just weeks old, thin, mud-covered, and staring up at the rescuers with a gaze so fierce, so raw, it stopped them in their tracks. He didn't bark, he didn't run. He simply placed one paw over his mother's neck as if protecting her from the very hands that came to save them. For 2 nights, he had stayed there, refusing food, refusing shelter, refusing to move. He kept watch, guarding the only family he had left, even as her breathing slowed. And in that moment, beneath gray skies and trembling silence, the rescuers realized this wasn't just another rescue. This was a story of love that refused to let go. A story that would leave every single one of them changed forever. They named her Leela, the mother. And the puppy who had refused to leave her side, even as her breaths came slow and shallow, they named him Koa, after the Hawaiian word for bravery. But on that rain-slicked morning when they first arrived, the rescuers didn't know their names. Only the weight of what they'd found, a mother broken, and a child holding the pieces together with nothing but love. One rescuer, Anna, knelt down slowly, instinctively, whispering softly as she approached, not wanting to startle the pup, but he didn't flinch. He just looked at her with those round, wet eyes that carried days of hunger, cold, and fear, yet burned with something stronger defiance. He had curled himself around Leela's face, shielding it from the rain, his small frame trembling as water rolled down his back and soaked into the dirt beneath them. There was no shelter here, no food, no protection, no reason they were still alive, except for him. He hadn't left, and because he hadn't, she hadn't died. The concrete slab that pinned her had crushed part of her spine. The vet would later say, the injury was old at least 4 or 5 days. But what stunned them most was the evidence that the puppy had tried to keep her alive. Claw marks in the mud near her mouth, where he'd pushed aside rocks as if trying to feed her. Wet paw prints, circling her head, back and forth, as though pacing, guarding, mourning. Lila couldn't move, but she could blink. And every time she did, her gaze found Koa. That bond, wordless, ancient, unbreakable, was all they had left. The team moved fast. They lifted the concrete with a jack and makeshift levers, trying not to jar her fragile body. Anna scooped up Koa first, but he screamed, a sharp guttural cry that made everyone freeze. He thrashed in her arms, his legs kicking wildly toward his mother, until Anna lowered him gently and let him press his head against Lila's cheek. Only then did he stop. Only then did he go quiet again. The team realized they had to work together, just physically, but emotionally. This wasn't a typical rescue. It was a delicate conversation between a dying mother and a grieving child. As the stretcher was placed beside Leela, Koa tried to climb onto it with her, slipping on the wet canvas as Anna guided him gently. He whimpered, but didn't fight. He just lay beside her, pressing his face into her fur, as if to remind her, I'm still here, don't go. And when they finally lifted her into the back of the van, he crawled beside her, never once breaking contact. The ride to the clinic was silent, except for the soft hum of tires and the occasional gasp of breath from Lila's crushed lungs. Koa didn't sleep. He didn't move. He simply stared ahead, as if memorizing the path, in case he ever had to find it again, alone. At the clinic, Dr. Mara met them at the door, eyes wide with concern, the moment he saw the state of Leela's body. Her breathing was shallow, her ribs protruded. But what caught his eye most was Koa curled up on top of her chest, like a soldier over a fallen comrade. Has he left her side at all? The doctor asked quietly. Not once, Anna whispered. He wouldn't let us touch her until we let him touch her first. They had to sedate Lila for x-rays and surgery prep, and when they carried her through the swinging doors, Koa tried to follow. Anna held him back, gently, firmly, and for the first time, his cries became real sharp, panicked, heart-wrenching. He pawed at the door. He howled. And then, finally, he sat in the corner of the waiting room, shivering, staring at nothing, his small body folded into silence. Hours passed. Anna stayed beside him, hand resting gently on his back, whispering now and then just to remind him he wasn't alone. The storm outside had passed, but inside the clinic, it still lingered in the quiet tension of the staff, in the sterilized hum of machines, in the heavy air that seemed to carry the weight of all the animals who had come before. When Dr. Mera returned, his face told the story before his words did. She made it, he said. Barely. Her spine's damaged, but we stabilized her. It's going to be a long road, but she's alive. Koa looked up, as if understanding, and then slowly cautiously walked toward the door the doctor had just come through. Can he see her? Anna asked. Dr. Mera paused. For a moment, but he might not understand. She's not awake. They opened the door, and Koa padded forward on unsteady legs. When he saw her tubes attached, bandages, across her back, chest rising slowly under a heat lamp, he whimpered, then curled at her side as naturally as if he had never left. The monitors beeped quietly. The room dimmed, and in that fragile silence, something unspoken passed between them. She couldn't open her eyes, but her ears twitched. Just enough. Just once. As if to say, I know you're still here. The clinic gave them their own room that night. A small recovery suite, warmer than most, with a single mattress beside Lila's crate. Anna slept on the floor. Koa didn't sleep at all. He sat alert, his head resting against the metal bars, eyes never closing. He guarded her in the night, just as he had in the dirt. This was not instinct. This was not training. This was grief wrapped in loyalty, and a love that refused to end just because a body broke. And even as dawn crept slowly into the clinic's windows, Koa remained still, his tiny frame frozen in vigil. The mother who had once fed him, warmed him, shielded him, was now the one clinging to life, and all he had to give, in return, was everything. The next morning came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise on a world that had already seen too much sorrow. Pale gold light filtered through the windows of the clinic's recovery room, brushing across the crate where Lila lay motionless, her breath faint but steady, her body still surrounded by machines, whispering their cold rhythm. And just beneath her, nestled tightly against the steel bars, lay Koa, his eyes open, his head resting on his outstretched paws, as if afraid that even blinking might mean missing her final breath. Anna entered quietly, cradling a warm towel and a bowl of softened food, crouching beside him, whispering as she always did, "Hey, little one, I brought something for you." But he didn't move. He hadn't eaten since they'd arrived. Not because he wasn't hungry, his thin ribs showed how desperately he needed nourishment, but because his loyalty had become his only purpose. He would not eat if she could not. He would not heal if she did not. Anna's hand hovered inches from his back. But she didn't pet him. She had learned that even kindness could be mistaken for disruption in a soul that had anchored itself so tightly to another. Instead, she set the bowl nearby and waited, watching him with the quiet ache of someone who has witnessed love take a shape more powerful than pain. Behind her, Dr. Mera entered, clipboard in hand, voice low. "She made it through the night," he said, not looking up, "but she's not responding. Her vitals are stable, but her brain activity, it's minimal. She's holding on, but just barely." Anna didn't reply. She only looked at Koa, who hadn't flinched, hadn't shifted. He was already aware. Somewhere deep in his tiny body, he knew she was still here, but the thread was fraying. Dr. Mara stepped closer. "We may need to prepare you, if she doesn't regain consciousness in the next 24 hours. But he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. Later that afternoon, the storm returned not from the sky, but from the emotions swelling quietly through the clinic halls. Volunteers whispered updates. Nurses moved around the recovery wing, as if their footsteps might disturb something sacred. Outside, people who had seen the photo Anna posted the puppy refusing to leave his mother began to arrive. First one, then another. A woman brought a blanket. A man left a bag of treats with a note, "For the bravest little boy." But Koa didn't notice. His world was a single heartbeat wrapped in wires and silence. And then, just past midnight, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden gasp or surge. Just a twitch, barely visible. But Koa felt it. He lifted his head suddenly, ears rising, eyes wide. Anna had been asleep beside him, but his movement jolted her awake. "What is it?" she whispered. Koa was already on his feet, paws pressed against the crate, tail stiff, body shaking not from fear but urgency. Anna leaned in. "Lila?" And then they saw it. Her eyelid fluttered. Once, twice, and then her eyes opened, slowly, glassy and unfocused, but undeniably alive. Koa let out a single, trembling whine, as if his voice had been trapped until this very moment. He pawed at the crate, trying to reach her, and this time, she moved. Her head turned just slightly, weak and heavy, but enough to find him, to see him, to remember. Her breath hitched, her body shifted, and in that sacred flicker of reunion, the silence inside the room broke. Anna cried, first hands to her mouth, eyes wide, whispering, "Oh my God, she's awake," over and over. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Mara followed, stunned, whispering instructions, adjusting machines. But through it all, Koa stayed frozen in place, his entire body trembling with what no machine could measure, the pure, aching joy of knowing she was still his. Over the next few days, the clinic transformed. Word of the rescue spread online. Millions watched the footage of the puppy who refused to let go, the mother who came back to life with her child's breath against her fur. Donations poured in, journalists called. But inside the room, none of that mattered. Lila's healing was slow, excruciating at times. Her spine had not been fully severed, but the damage was extensive. She couldn't walk. She could barely lift her head without help. But she could feel. She could recognize voices. And most importantly, she responded to Koa. When he licked her cheek, her ears would twitch. When he lay beside her, her breathing steadied. She began to eat, but only when he did. Nurses started placing their bowls side by side, and slowly, day by day, the mother who had once been half buried in silence began to return to her puppy. Not in strength, but in presence. Koa, too, began to change. The lines of tension in his body began to soften. He wagged his tail once, then again. He played with a ball someone brought in just once, just for a moment, but it was enough to make Anna cry again. It was the sound of a childhood briefly returned. And yet, even as progress came, there were shadows that never fully left. On the 10th day, a clinic volunteer named Luca came to clean Lila's bedding and noticed something strange. The way Koa flinched when a door slammed. The way his body pressed flat to the ground when a man entered the room with heavy boots. These weren't normal reactions. They were learned, conditioned. Anna watched closer, connecting the dots. How had they ended up at the construction site? Who left them there? The answers began to emerge, slowly, fragments pieced together from old intake records. A blurred surveillance photo from a nearby gas station. Lila had been owned. Not abandoned by accident, but dumped. Injured, discarded, with her puppy by her side. A collar had been removed. A chip had been scraped out. Someone had tried to erase them. And Koa had been meant to die beside her, but he didn't. He stayed. And because he stayed, Leela lived. Weeks passed, then months. Leela began physical therapy. She could stand with support, walk a few steps. Koa remained by her side for every session, mimicking her pace, watching her every movement like a tiny guardian. The clinic staff said they'd never seen anything like it. And neither had Anna. The bond between them had only grown stronger, no longer born of trauma, but of recovery. They became symbols, not of tragedy, but of endurance, of the kind of love that refuses to die, even when the world decides it should. And when the day finally came that Lila walked unassisted for more than 10 steps, Koa followed behind her, not clinging, not crying, but walking with pride, side by side. 2 survivors, 2 hearts that refused to let go. They didn't know where she had come from, not truly not, until weeks later, when a woman named Rosa showed up at the clinic with a trembling lip and an old photo in her hand, one that had been folded and smoothed so many times the faces in it had faded. The photo showed a younger Leela, clearly her strong, proud, eyes alert, standing in a sunlit yard beside a young boy, perhaps 8 or 9. And Rosa's voice shook as she whispered. Her name was Reina. She belonged to my grandson, Anna, who had just finished Koa's feeding and was still kneeling beside his mat. Stood slowly, her breath caught in her chest. Reina, she echoed, and Rosa nodded, tears already rolling down her cheeks. We lost track of her after my son died. Everything fell apart after that. His house was sold. The dogs were rehomed, or so I was told. Her voice cracked. We didn't know she ended up like this. The room was still. Even Koa seemed to pause, sensing the shift in air, the quiet tremble of something sacred unfolding. Rosa sat down slowly beside him, her fingers brushing his fur. And this one, she asked softly, he's hers. Anna nodded, watching the older woman's hand shake as she reached again. He was born after, I suppose. I don't know how she ended up pregnant or how they got to that site, but they were dumped. That's what we believe. Rosa swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. No, she said. They weren't dumped. And then, like a story unraveling thread by thread, she told them everything. Reina had been a family dog, trained, loved, gentle, beyond measure. Her son Carlos had rescued her when she was a puppy, and the 2 had been inseparable. When Carlos passed in a car accident, Reina had howled for days. She sat at the door, Rosa whispered, waiting, refusing to eat. It was like she knew he wasn't coming home, but she couldn't accept it. The dog was taken in by a neighbor, temporarily. A man Carlos had trusted, but Rosa later learned the man had a criminal record involving illegal breeding. I didn't check. I didn't ask enough questions, Rosa said bitterly, eyes rimmed red. He told me she'd be safe. I wanted to believe him. But that man, his name was Eliasad, run a backyard operation that bred purebreds for quick cash, selling puppies online, and often under false papers. Reina, already grieving, had been used repeatedly, bred without rest, confined in a small enclosure, denied basic care. She wasn't just a mother, Rosa said. She was a machine to them. The idea made Anna physically recoil. She had seen the signs: Leela's scarred belly, the dull patches of fur, the way her eyes seemed both ancient and empty, and now every silent mark made sense. Elias had moved operations several times, eventually vanishing after reports surfaced of dogs being found in poor condition along the county lines. It was likely he had dumped Reina and her last surviving pup when she became too injured to sell or breed again, and he left them, Rosa whispered, to die, to bury his mistake. Anna felt the weight of it settle in her chest like stone. She had always known that dogs suffered quietly, that cruelty often happened in places no one ever saw. But this was different. This wasn't neglect. This was the erasure of a life, of a bond, of a history. of love turned to utility, and discarded like trash. And yet, in the middle of that destruction, something had survived. Koa, not just alive but loving, loyal, unwilling to leave his mother, even when the world had. The vet team began looking deeper, connecting records, piecing together the timeline, tracing ad listings and old shelter reports that painted a horrifying picture of how long Reyna had been missing from kindness. She had been used for nearly 2 years, passed between hands, until the final act, bred once more, injured during labor, and left with only a single surviving pup, Koa. The others hadn't made it. Anna cried when she found that out. She sat in her car that night after leaving the clinic, sobbing into her steering wheel at the thought of Reyna giving birth in a place of shadows. Struggling alone, her babies dying, one by one, until only one remained. And somehow, against all odds, and that one had made it through. The thought haunted her, but it also ignited something deeper. Because Koa wasn't just any dog. He was a story that had refused to end, a bond that had refused to break, a living echo of every moment Reyna had endured but never surrendered to. Over the following days, Rosa began visiting regularly. She brought old toys, Reyna might remember, clothes with familiar scents. And every time she sat on the floor beside them, something gentle would return to Lila's gaseous. Even her name began to change in Anna's mind. Not just Lila, the rescue now, Reyna, the dog with a life, a memory, a son she had once protected just like she now protected Koa. It was as if every visit reawakened a piece of her spirit. She would lift her head longer, eat with more eagerness, wag her tail slightly, but undeniably when Rosa called her name in that whispery, tearful voice, "Reyna, you remember me, don't you, baby?" And she did. Bit by bit, the past folded into the present. Koa's playfulness returned in cautious bursts. He chased a toy in the yard one morning, running in a wide arc before quickly darting back to his mother's side. His world had expanded, but its center remained fixed. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft amber light, Anna found him resting his head across her paw, both of them watching the wind move through the grass. Stillness between them filled with something almost holy. But the past, no matter how deeply buried, was not done yet, because Elias had resurfaced. Not publicly, not in person, but in a string of online posts traced by a volunteer investigator who had grown obsessed with the story. A new account, a new name, selling German Shepherd, mixes young, thin, under-socialized. One had a mark that looked eerily like one of Reyna's surviving pups from an old litter. Anna felt sick. It wasn't just Reyna. It wasn't just Koa. There were others, still out there, still trapped, still waiting in cages for a hand that wouldn't hit, for a voice that wouldn't command. And suddenly, the rescue no longer felt completed, felt like a beginning. Anna spoke to the sheriff's department. Rosa filed a formal complaint. And slowly, the walls began to close in on a man who thought he'd left no traces. But while the system moved slowly, Koa and Reyna moved on. One evening, weeks after Rosa's first visit, Anna found them lying on a blanket in the grass outside the clinic. Reyna's body was still healing, her legs still weak, but her eyes were clear now. Her coat was starting to shine again, and Koa had placed his favorite toy, a soft rubber duck, beside her head, nudging it forward with a look that said, "Play with me." Just once. And as Anna watched, Reyna lifted her paw and tapped it gently. Not much, just a flick, but it was enough to make Koa leap back in joy, spinning in a tiny circle, letting out a high-pitched bark that startled birds from the nearby tree. Anna laughed out loud. "Look at you," she whispered, still teaching her how to live. And maybe that was it. Maybe the deepest truth of their story wasn't just about survival, it was about return, about reclaiming what cruelty tried to steal, about building something gentle where once there was only silence. And that night, as the stars came out and the clinic lights dimmed, Anna sat with them in the dark, one hand resting on Koa's back, the other brushing gently through Reina's fur, and thought to herself, this is what healing looks like, not fast, not perfect, but real. She didn't know what the future would bring, whether justice would be swift or slow, whether more dogs would be found. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. These two had already won, not because the world had given them back what was taken, but because they had given it to each other. The days that followed began to stretch and soften, as if time itself had slowed to match Reina's healing breath and Koa's patient watchfulness. But beneath that growing peace, a deeper shift had begun, one neither Anna nor Rosa had fully prepared for. Because once cruelty is seen, truly seen, it doesn't let you rest. It follows you into the quiet, into the stillness, into every moment that should feel safe. Anna had started keeping her phone on the nightstand with the volume turned up, checking cameras outside the clinic twice a night, locking every door twice instead of once. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something she couldn't name, like the echo of someone still watching, still circling the story they thought they had buried for good. And she wasn't wrong. The clinic received a call one morning from a blocked number, no voice, just the sound of breathing, faint and steady, before it hung up. An hour later, Anna found a note taped to the back door, written in jagged ink on torn paper. You should have let them die. She didn't tell Rosa. She didn't even tell Dr. Mara. She folded the note in half, placed it in her desk drawer, and moved the sleeping pads closer to her own office, keeping Reina and Koa within her sight through every hour of every shift. That evening, as she sat beside them with a blanket wrapped tightly round her shoulders, she whispered quietly to Koa, you knew someone was out there that day, didn't you? You felt it. The puppy didn't respond, but his eyes lifted, alert again in a way Anna hadn't seen since that first night in the rain. It was like a cord had tightened, unseen but unmistakable. And from that moment, everything shifted. Rosa began arriving earlier, staying later. She brought photos, documents, evidence, anything that might build a stronger case against Elias, whose new alias was now confirmed. The investigation had grown legs, with 2 other complaints filed in nearby towns about injured dogs abandoned in remote areas. A pattern was emerging, one that pointed straight to the man who had used Reina, until her body broke and discarded her without pause. But even as they built their case, the clinic became more than a shelter, it became a fortress. One night, a motion light caught someone moving outside. By the time Anna reached the window, the figure had vanished, leaving behind only muddy footprints in the gravel and a sickening feeling in her gut. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Koa. He sat at the door for hours, unmoving, ears perked toward the wind, as if waiting for something or someone to return. It wasn't just instinct. It was memory, a trauma so deeply etched into his being that safety felt temporary, fragile, as if it could be taken away in a blink. And in that tension, a decision began to grow, subtle at first, like a seed beneath the soil, but undeniable. Anna couldn't let them stay here forever. Not in a clinic where strangers could find them. Not in a place meant to be temporary. They needed a home, a real one. And maybe, just maybe, she was the one meant to give it. The thought terrified her. She hadn't allowed herself to consider it before. She had told herself she was just helping, just fostering, just protecting them until the right person came along. But what if the right person was already here? What if the bond Koa had formed with her, the way he followed her shadow, rested, his chin on her feet, sighed only when her hand rested on his back, was his way of choosing? And Reina, though slower and more careful, had begun shifting too. She no longer flinched when Aina sat beside her. She no longer looked to Rosa first. It was Aina who fed her now. Aina who walked her down the recovery hallway. Aina whose voice made her ears twitched with recognition. And so, after one long, quiet night beneath a sky full of stars, Anna turned to Rosa, her voice low but certain. I want to keep them, she said. Both of them, if they'll have me. Rosa said nothing for a moment, just stared at her with eyes that had seen more pain than most, and finally nodded. Then you better start packing, she whispered, because that little one already thinks you belong to him. The next week passed in a blur of paperwork and planning. Anna filed for adoption, secured a transfer of records, and took a week off from clinic duty to prepare her home, installing ramps, patting floors, buying chew toys, and placing 2 beds beside her own. She wasn't naive. She knew this wouldn't be simple. Raina would always need care. Koa would always carry scars. But she also knew this wasn't just rescue. This was family. On the morning she brought them home, the sky was a pale silver, quiet and open, like the world itself had paused to watch. Raina stepped cautiously into the yard, her legs still stiff but steady. Koa bounded ahead, then stopped halfway to the porch and turned, waiting. He wouldn't go in without her. Anna knelt beside them both, whispering, "You're safe now, really safe." And when they crossed the threshold together, she felt something release inside her, a fear, a grief, a silence she hadn't known she was still carrying. That night, she lit a single candle in the window, just as Rosa had done, once for her grandson, and whispered to the quiet, "This is your home now." But peace, as she had come to learn, doesn't arrive without consequence. 2 days later, Anna received another envelope, this time left on her windshield. No note, just a printed photo. Raina, in the cage, mud on her face, Koa curled beside her. The photo had never been released publicly. Only a handful of people had seen it. Someone was still watching. Someone who wanted her to remember. Anna took the photo inside, burned it in the kitchen sink, and stared into the flame until only ash remained. Then she turned, opened the back door, and stepped into the night where Koa and Raina lay sleeping beneath the stars. She didn't say anything. She just sat with them, one hand on each of their backs, listening to their breathing, slow, steady, alive. And in that rhythm, she found her strength. Because now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about protection. About standing between them and the past. About drawing a line that no one would ever cross again. Anna had made her choice. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. And whatever storm still lingered on the horizon, she would meet it head-on with Koa at her side and Raina at her back. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the moment everything began to change. There are certain nights that feel older than others' nights, when the sky holds a kind of stillness that makes everything below it pause, breathe, and remember. And it was under one of those skies that Anna stood barefoot in the yard, the porch light behind her flickering gently, casting her shadow out toward the grass where Raina and Koa now lay together, half asleep, half aware, wrapped in the quiet of a world that was finally beginning to forget how to hurt them. It had been nearly 3 months since she brought them home. 3 months of whispered nights and careful walks, of slow meals and cautious progress, of vet visits that felt more like therapy sessions, and mornings that began not with barking, but with soft sighs and the shuffle of padded feet beside her bed. Raina no longer limped. Not all the time. Her back legs still struggled on damp days, still buckled slightly when she stepped off the porch too fast. But the fire in her had returned, not in leaps and bounds, but in the way she greeted Anna, with a lifted head and tail that wagged slowly, as if trusting joy for the first time in years. And Koa had grown, taller, stronger, but still quiet, still carrying the weight of his first weeks in the world somewhere behind his amber eyes. He had developed a habit of circling the perimeter of the yard every evening, nose to the ground, ears alert, not out of fear, but ritual, as if ensuring the shadows no longer hid the past. Only then would he settle by Raina, touching his back to hers, anchoring her gently, as he had done since the moment Anna first saw him curled in the mud. But tonight was different. Something in the air carried a hum she couldn't name, a tension between peace and memory, Because earlier that afternoon, the sheriff had called. "We've got him," he said simply. Elias caught not with dogs, but with documents, ledgers of transactions, notes about breeding rotations, photos of animals long since vanished. It had taken months, but the task force had pieced it together, following his trail from shelters to back roads, and now he was in custody. He hadn't confessed, not directly, but the evidence was damning. And one image burned into Anna's mind was the photo Rosa had described long ago. Reyna, caged, her newborn pups pressed against her side, barely visible in the dark. All except one, Koa, clear as day. Anna had stood silently in the sheriff's office staring at the printed image, her jaw clenched, her hand gripping the table's edge until her knuckles turned white. She hadn't cried. Not then. Not until she came home and found Koa waiting by the door, tail wagging slowly, eyes searching her face. He always knew, always. And when she sat on the porch beside him, resting her hand on his back, she whispered, "You're free now. Really, truly free." But saying it didn't make it real, not yet. Because freedom, she had learned, wasn't just the absence of cages. It was the healing that followed. It was learning to rest without fear, to breathe without flinching, to trust love when it knocked gently instead of kicked in the door. And that's what this final chapter had become, not a victory march, but a quiet unfolding, a slow, steady surrender to safety. Over the next few weeks, the house became something else entirely. Visitors came, not reporters or strangers with questions, but survivors. People who had adopted from the clinic's rescues, people who had once stood in similar storms. They came with flowers, letters, photos of the dogs they'd saved, each one a ripple of what Reyna and Koa had started. One woman brought a notebook filled with journal entries she had written after watching their story online. Another came with her teenage son, who had started volunteering at the local shelter because, in his words, if that puppy didn't give up, neither should I. And Anna, humbled beyond measure, let them sit in her garden, meet the dogs, stroke their fur, listen to the soft rhythm of two hearts that had once stopped beating in a field of mud. Reyna responded best to children. Koa preferred silence. But both of them gave something sacred to each person who came, proof that healing wasn't just possible, it was contagious. Still, for Anna, the most transformative moment came not with applause, but in a moment so small it might have gone unnoticed. It was just after dusk, a Tuesday like any other, and she was washing dishes when she looked out the window and froze. Koa was playing, not chasing or testing. Playing. He had taken a stick in his mouth and darted across the grass, tail wagging, head low, teasing Reyna into following him, and she did. Not with speed, but with purpose. The two of them tumbled gently into each other like puppies, legs tangled, ears perked, letting out sounds Anna hadn't heard before, barks not of warning, but laughter, joy, pure and real and unfiltered. She dropped the dish, ran outside, and just watched. And in that moment, it hit her not like a wave, but like the settling of dust after years of chaos. They were whole, not perfect, not untouched, but whole. Later that night, Anna wrote the final line in the journal she had kept since the day she found them. It read simply, "Today, they forgot the pain long enough to remember how to live." But still, the story wasn't over, because a letter arrived the next day, from Elias. Not to her, to Rosa, mailed from the county jail. Inside was no apology, no admission of guilt, just a single sentence scribbled on a torn scrap of paper. They were never supposed to matter. Rosa brought it to Anna, hands shaking. Anna read it once, then again. Then, without a word, she walked outside, placed it under a stone in the garden, and left it there to be erased by rain. "He's wrong," she said finally. "They mattered more than he'll ever understand." Months passed. Seasons changed. and the world outside their small home moved forward. But inside, life found its rhythm. Reyna began sleeping through the night without trembling. Koa stopped circling the yard before bedtime. Anna adopted 2 more rescues each, one broken in their own way, each one welcomed with the grace only dogs like Reyna and Koa could offer. The house, once quiet and cautious, now pulsed with life, barking, wagging, healing, and on one bright spring morning, as the sun warmed the porch and the wind moved gently through the garden, Anna sat beside Reyna, Koa at her feet, and whispered something she had been holding for weeks. "You saved her," she said softly to Koa, "and she saved you. But both of you, you saved me." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He simply stood, climbed into her lap, and rested his head against her heart, his chest rising and falling in time with hers. And in that quiet rhythm, the world outside fell away. There was no past, no cages, no notes, no names, just this. Just love, pure and undefeated, the kind that endures, the kind that survives, the kind that lives on in every silent bond between the broken and the brave. And as Anna closed her eyes and let the sunlight touch her face, she whispered the words that had become their prayer, their anthem, their vow: "You're home now, and no one will ever take that away." If you've listened this far, if you felt something stir inside you, when Koa curled his body around Reyna's ribs, when Anna held a torn letter over the garden stone, or when a broken dog remembered how to play, then this story was never just about them. It was about all of us, about what we choose to see and what we choose to ignore. Because while Reyna and Koa found their way back to warmth, there are still hundreds, thousands left in cold silence. Dogs trembling in back alleys, puppies clinging to lifeless mothers behind dumpsters, creatures left in fields like discarded thoughts. Their stories don't always make it online. Their eyes don't always get met with cameras. Some of them never cry loud enough to be heard, and some give up waiting. But they exist. Right now, tonight, in shelters where no one walks through the door, in chains behind closed fences, in the corner of someone's yard where the bowl is always empty. We tell ourselves the world is too big, the problem too wide, the cruelty too old to fix. But it doesn't take much. Sometimes it only takes one. One woman driving home who stops when no one else does. One volunteer who hears a sound beneath the dirt. One boy who picks up a leash instead of a phone. One person may be you who sees a post and decides to act. Koa didn't save Reyna because he was strong. He saved her because he refused to walk away. He stayed, even when the rain came. Even when she stopped moving. Even when the world turned its back, he stayed. And maybe that's the lesson buried deepest in this story. Not just that love can heal, but that loyalty has weight, that staying others leave is a kind of rescue all on its own. So now, the question is no longer what happened to Reyna and Koa. The question is, what will you do with what you now know? Will you forget this story the moment the screen fades? Or will you carry it into your own quiet corners? Will you pause the next time you hear a sound in the distance, or see a shadow limping through the street? Will you choose to speak when others look away? Because there's a Koa out there right now, pressed against a shivering body, refusing to move. There's a Reyna, half buried, waiting for one more reason to hold on. You may never know their names, but you might be the reason they survive. Visit your local shelter. Foster, even if only for a weekend. Donate food. Share stories. Speak gently. Love loudly. Rescue doesn't begin in headlines. It begins in hearts. And if this story touched yours, then maybe, just maybe, it was meant for you. Because while we cannot fix everything, we can change everything for one. And sometimes, that one changes the world. Just like Koa did. Just like Reyna did. Just like you can. So don't let this be the end. Let this be the beginning of your story, of their second chance, of the moment you decided to stay.